The land of Israel has witnessed more history than perhaps any other place on earth. From biblical times to the modern state, this small strip of land between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River has been home to prophets and kings, witnessed the rise and fall of empires, and served as the birthplace of three major world religions. To understand Israel today, we must journey through thousands of years of triumph and tragedy, exile and return, destruction and rebirth. Our story begins nearly 4,000 years ago when, according to biblical tradition, Abraham was called by God to leave his home in Mesopotamia and journey to the land of Canaan. This promise, that Abraham's descendants would inherit this land and become a great nation, forms the foundation of Jewish connection to the land of Israel. Abraham's grandson Jacob, whose name was changed to Israel after wrestling with an angel, gave his name to both the people and the land. His 12 sons became the founders of the 12 tribes of Israel. The Israelites' defining moment came with their exodus from slavery in Egypt, led by Moses around the 13th century BCE. After receiving the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai and wandering in the desert for 40 years, they entered the Promised Land under Joshua's leadership. For the next 2 centuries, the 12 tribes lived in a loose confederation, united mainly during times of crisis by charismatic leaders called judges. Around 1000 BCE, the Israelites demanded a king to unite them like other nations. Their first king, Saul, was followed by David, who captured Jerusalem from the Jebusites and made it his capital. David's son Solomon built the first temple in Jerusalem, creating a magnificent center for Jewish worship that would define the spiritual life of the nation. Under Solomon's reign, the Kingdom of Israel reached its greatest extent and prosperity, controlling trade routes and maintaining diplomatic relations with neighboring powers. But this golden age didn't last. After Solomon's death around 930 BCE, the kingdom split into two: Israel in the north with its capital in Samaria, and Judah in the south, centered on Jerusalem. This division weakened both kingdoms, making them vulnerable to the rising powers around them. The northern kingdom of Israel fell first to the Assyrian Empire in 722 BCE. The Assyrians deported much of the population, leading to the legend of the 10 lost tribes who disappeared from history. The southern kingdom of Judah survived another century and a half until 586 BCE, when the Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jerusalem, destroyed Solomon's temple, and exiled the Jewish elite to Babylon. This catastrophe could have ended the Jewish story, as happened to so many other ancient peoples who lost their homeland. But in Babylon, the exiles maintained their identity, developing new forms of worship and beginning to compile their sacred texts into what would become the Hebrew Bible. When Cyrus the Great of Persia conquered Babylon in 539 BCE, he allowed the Jewish exiles to return home and rebuild their temple. Many returned, though others remained in what became a permanent diaspora. The Second Temple was completed in 515 BCE, smaller than Solomon's, but no less significant as the heart of renewed Jewish life in the land. For the next few centuries, the Jewish community in Judea lived under Persian and then Greek rule following Alexander the Great's conquests. The attempt by the Greek Seleucid king Antiochus IV to suppress Jewish religion in 167 BCE sparked the Maccabean revolt. Led by a priestly family called the Hasmoneans, the Jews won a surprising victory against the mighty Greek army, recaptured Jerusalem, and rededicated the temple, an event still celebrated as Hanukkah. The Hasmoneans established an independent Jewish kingdom that lasted about a century, expanding to include much of ancient Israel's territory. This independence ended in 63 BCE, when the Roman general Pompey intervened in a Hasmonean civil war and made Judea a client state of Rome. The Romans initially ruled through local kings like Herod the Great, who rebuilt the temple into a magnificent structure, but was despised for his cruelty and collaboration with Rome. It was during this period of Roman rule that Jesus of Nazareth lived and preached, founding a movement that would eventually become Christianity. Growing tensions between Jews and Romans exploded into the First Jewish-Roman War in 66 CE. Despite fierce resistance, the rebellion was doomed. In 70 CE, Roman legions led by Titus besieged Jerusalem, destroyed the Second Temple, and killed or enslaved hundreds of thousands of Jews. The destruction of the temple marked a turning point in Jewish history, forcing a transformation from a temple-based religion to one centered on prayer, study, and observance of Jewish law. Some Jewish communities remained in the land, now renamed Syria Palestina by the Romans to erase Jewish connection to it. A final desperate revolt, led by Simon Bar Kokhba from 132 to 135 CE, brought even greater catastrophe. The Romans crushed the rebellion with overwhelming force, killing over 500,000 Jews, according to ancient sources. They banned Jews from Jerusalem, sold thousands into slavery, and scattered survivors across the empire. The center of Jewish life shifted to Babylon and other diaspora communities. For the next 1,800 years, Jewish sovereignty over the land of Israel ceased. The land changed hands repeatedly, from Byzantine Christians to Arab Muslims in the 7th century to Crusaders in the 11th century, back to Muslim rule under the Mamluks, and then the Ottoman Empire from 1517. Through all these changes, small Jewish communities persisted in cities like Jerusalem, Saft, Tiberias, and Hebron, maintaining an unbroken Jewish presence in the land. The modern return to Zion began in the late 19th century as European Jews faced increasing persecution. The Dreyfus Affair in France convinced journalist Theodor Herzl that Jews would never be safe without their own state. In 1897, he convened the First Zionist Congress, launching the political movement to re-establish a Jewish homeland. At the same time, pogroms in Russia drove waves of Jewish immigrants to Ottoman Palestine, where they established agricultural settlements and revived Hebrew as a spoken language. World War I transformed the Middle East. Britain conquered Palestine from the Ottomans, and in 1917 issued the Balfour Declaration, promising to facilitate the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. The League of Nations formalized British control through the Mandate for Palestine in 1920, charging Britain with implementing the Balfour Declaration while protecting the rights of the Arab population. The following decades saw growing Jewish immigration, especially as anti-Semitism rose in Europe. Jews drained swamps, built cities, and created the institutions of a state in waiting. But increased Jewish presence sparked Arab opposition, leading to riots and violence. Britain tried to balance competing promises to Jews and Arabs, satisfying neither. The 1939 White Paper severely restricted Jewish immigration, just as Nazi persecution made escape desperately urgent. The Holocaust, which murdered 6 million Jews, 1/3 of the world's Jewish population, made the case for a Jewish state morally overwhelming. When World War II ended, survivors languished in displaced persons camps, with most countries unwilling to accept them. Britain, exhausted by war and unable to keep peace in Palestine, turned the problem over to the newly formed United Nations. On November 29, 1947, the UN voted to partition Palestine into separate Jewish and Arab states, with Jerusalem under international control. Jews accepted the plan despite disappointment at the small, fragmented territory allotted to them. Arab states and Palestinian Arabs rejected any Jewish state, launching attacks on Jewish communities the day after the vote. As civil war raged and the British prepared to leave, Jewish forces implemented Plan de Ley to secure the territory allocated to them by the UN. On May 14, 1948, as the last British forces departed, David Ben-Gurion declared the establishment of the State of Israel. He deliberately didn't define borders, knowing they would be determined by the war everyone knew was coming. Within hours, armies from Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon invaded, confident they would crush the newborn state. The Arab League's Secretary General promised a war of extermination and momentous massacre. Against all odds, Israel survived. The war lasted until 1949, with several truces and resumed fighting. When armistice agreements were finally signed, Israel controlled more territory than the UN partition plan had allocated, including Western Jerusalem. But the victory came at tremendous cost. 6,000 Israelis died, 1% of the entire population. The war also created a refugee crisis, with about 750,000 Palestinian Arabs fleeing or being expelled from their homes. A catastrophe Palestinians call the Nakba. The Arab states refused to make peace or recognize Israel, and hundreds of thousands of Jews in Arab countries faced persecution, forcing them to flee to Israel. The massive immigration doubled Israel's population within 3 years, straining the young state's resources but fulfilling its mission as a refuge for Jews worldwide. These immigrants from Yemen, Iraq, Morocco, and dozens of other countries transformed Israel into a diverse, multicultural society. The early years were marked by austerity and struggle as Israel absorbed immigrants, built institutions, and defended against constant attacks. The 1956 Suez Crisis saw Israel ally with Britain and France against Egypt, capturing the Sinai Peninsula before withdrawing under American and Soviet pressure. Border skirmishes and terrorist attacks continued through the 1960s as Arab states maintained their rejection of Israel's existence. By 1967, tensions reached a breaking point. Egypt's President Nasser expelled UN peacekeepers from Sinai, massed troops on Israel's border, and blockaded the Straits of Tiran, cutting off Israel's access to the Red Sea. As Arab leaders promised Israel's imminent destruction and armies mobilized on all frontiers, Israel faced a choice between waiting to be attacked or striking first. On June 5, 1967, Israel launched preemptive airstrikes that destroyed the Egyptian Air Force on the ground. In just 6 days, Israel defeated the combined armies of Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, capturing the Sinai Peninsula, Gaza Strip, West Bank, Golan Heights, and East Jerusalem, including the Old City and the Western Wall. For the first time in 2,000 years, Jerusalem was united under Jewish sovereignty. The Six-Day War transformed Israel and the Middle East. Israel offered to return captured territories in exchange for peace, but the Arab League responded with the 3 no's: no peace, no recognition, no negotiations. The territories became a source of ongoing conflict, with Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza now under Israeli military administration. Jewish settlements began appearing in the territories, creating facts on the ground that complicated future negotiations. The 1973 Yom Kippur War nearly reversed Israel's victories when Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack on Judaism's holiest day. Caught off guard, Israel suffered heavy casualties before rallying to push back the invaders. The war's trauma led to soul-searching in Israel and eventually to the first Arab-Israeli peace treaty. In 1979, Egypt's President Sadat made a historic visit to Jerusalem, leading to the Camp David Accords and Israel's withdrawal from Sinai in exchange for peace. The 1980s brought new challenges as Israel engaged with Lebanon's civil war, attempting to stop Palestinian attacks from Lebanese territory. The controversial war lasted 18 years and divided Israeli society. Meanwhile, the First Intifada erupted in 1987 as Palestinians in the territories rebelled against Israeli occupation, using stones and civil disobedience against one of the world's strongest militaries. The 1990s began with hope as the Oslo Accords created the Palestinian Authority and promised a path to peace. Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and PLO leader Yasser Arafat shook hands on the White House lawn, and Israel signed a peace treaty with Jordan. But the peace process collapsed amid terrorism and assassination. Rabin was murdered by a Jewish extremist in 1995, and the Second Intifada beginning in 2000 brought unprecedented violence. Israel withdrew unilaterally from Gaza in 2005, hoping to reduce friction, but Hamas took control and turned the territory into a launching pad for rockets. The 2006 Lebanon War and repeated conflicts with Gaza demonstrated that territorial withdrawal didn't guarantee peace. Iran's nuclear program and support for Israel's enemies created new existential concerns, even as Israel developed into a prosperous, high-tech democracy. Throughout its modern history, Israel has faced a fundamental dilemma: how to remain both Jewish and democratic while controlling territories with a large Palestinian population. The settlement movement, supported by some as returning to biblical heartlands and opposed by others as an obstacle to peace, embodies this tension. Multiple attempts at negotiation have failed to resolve final status issues like borders, Jerusalem, refugees, and security arrangements. Today's Israel is a study in contrasts. It's a thriving democracy with a booming economy, world-class universities, and innovations in technology, medicine, and agriculture. Yet it remains in conflict with neighbors, faces international criticism over the Palestinian issue, and grapples with internal divisions between secular and religious, left and right, Jews and Arabs. The recent Abraham Accords normalized relations with several Arab states, suggesting new regional dynamics, but the Palestinian conflict remains unresolved. The October 7, 2023 Hamas attack that killed over 1,200 Israelis marked another traumatic chapter, launching a devastating war in Gaza that has claimed thousands of lives and renewed debates about Israel's future. As Israel approaches its 80th anniversary, it remains what it has always been, a small nation in a tough neighborhood, miraculous in its achievements, yet facing perpetual challenges to its security and identity. The history of Israel is far from over. It's a story still being written by 8 million citizens who wake up each day in a country that combines ancient heritage with cutting-edge modernity, that faces existential threats while building for the future, that serves as a homeland for Jews while struggling to accommodate all its inhabitants. From Abraham's journey to today's headlines, the land of Israel remains at the center of history, a place where past and present, sacred and secular, hope and conflict continue to intersect in ways that capture the world's attention and shape the destiny of nations.